Alright, um, here goes. I'm going to try and make a video about something that has perhaps um, been a very integral, important part of my life for a while now. And I think it's high time that I make this video um, so that I can help myself process some of the experiences I've had, and perhaps with the intention of being able to share my experiences, share my narrative, my story with other people, and also to document um, something like a education about what it is, right? Um, so I'm going to start with something very simple, very easy to understand, and it's called long COVID. And so, long COVID, according to the WHO, is defined as a continuation or development of new symptoms 3 months after the initial COVID infection, with symptoms lasting for at least 2 months with no other explanation. So, some of the common symptoms of long COVID include fatigue, shortness of breath, and cognitive dysfunction, but we're presently tracking something close to 200 different symptoms, um, things that affect our entire physiology. It's a systemic dysfunction, and it's not just the observable systems, right? It's not just the ear, nose, throat, neuro, uh, rheumatic, endocrine, obstetrics kind of stuff. It also is something that fundamentally affects our biochemistry. It is something that very fundamentally affects the way in which our cells start behaving, the way in which our cells are manipulated, the way in which our cells begin functioning, dysfunctioning, right? So this is like a multi-system kind of disorientation. And so I think it's very important for me to talk about it. It's very important for me to be able to put down these points um, as a sort of in a video format, because it's easier for people to engage with it. It's easier for people to understand. It's easier for other professionals to reference, right? And maybe it makes some sense uh, that way. Okay, so this is just going to be filmed in one continuous take. I'm not going to edit it, um, no changes whatsoever. So it's just as is, as things are flowing to me. I'm going to put them down so that people can understand, people can sort of figure out what's happening. Okay, so I'd like just to kind of start with that. So when we talk about long COVID, we are examining the fact that um, 1 in 10 individuals or 2 in 10 individuals conservatively after a COVID infection tend to develop long lasting symptoms. That is, the moment they develop an infection, um, there is something that separates individuals that get long COVID versus individuals that are unaffected by COVID. But some of the more recent studies indicate that every individual or every living organism that is affected by the SARS-CoV virus tend to develop some sort of lasting dysfunction. And I think that's a very important point to note. Okay, so just in terms of numbers, the WHO suggests that it's 10% or 20% of all individuals that get COVID tend to develop these dysfunctions. However, the exact numbers are pretty uncertain, because nearly every system, every um, method that we're using to statistically estimate the extent of long COVID, they're all throwing up different numbers. So some studies look at higher numbers such as 50%, right? So that's 1 in 2 people, or 5 out of 10 people, or 50 out of 100 people. Other studies are indicating something closer to 70 to 80%. So again, that's 7 in 10 or 70 out of 100 people, right? Or 700 out of 1,000 people. So as we start moving up into the big numbers, population wide numbers, we're looking at massive figures. Um, and this is a once in a lifetime, thrice in a humanity, 4 times in a whatever kind of occurrence. It's rare, but it's not unheard of, right? And so I think that's the important point, right? That while this dysfunction, while this syndrome appears to be unheard of, people don't know where it's coming from. This is not the first time humanity is addressing such an issue. Okay, so I'd like to maybe sort of point out that um, the reason I'm making this, again, as I said, the reason I'm making this video is so that, one, I can offer some of the science of it, and two, we can offer a lived experience, which I think is very important, um, especially in a Southeast Asian context, where the phenomenology or the experience of illness is kind of sidelined. Um, it's undervalued, because what we deal with in Southeast Asia are numbers, and when we have so many people sort of dysfunctioning, it becomes very difficult for us to say, right, let's focus on what really people are experiencing. But this in itself is a sort of disservice, because the the only way in which we can intervene eventually is when we know what the precise dysfunctions are, when we know precisely what people are experiencing. If we don't document, if we don't classify, if we don't put down what individuals are going through, there is a chance that we will just never know. And the Indian system of medicine, first, is divided between the allopathic systems, and then you have what are called the Ayush systems. So Ayurveda, yoga, um, Unani, Siddha, and homeopathy, right? And both of these systems sort of converge around the treatment or intervention of dysfunction. But they're two very different systems, and they've both been looking at the problem quite differently from their perspectives. Okay, so I'd like to maybe offer the first idea, which is uh, we can sort of trace a history of it. So maybe that's how I can start this. So I first had COVID in long COVID. I first had COVID in December of 2022. I didn't know it was COVID at the time. Um, I had an extremely bad fever, bad cough and cold, extreme fatigue, nausea, weakness, uh, just this kind of multi system disorientation. And much like everyone else, I would probably describe it as the worst cold that I'd ever experienced in my life. I didn't think it was COVID, um, because at least the public health programming in India suggested that, it wasn't a probability. The numbers were going down, and there was all the public health messaging. We're out of it, we're approaching recoveries, and the numbers are better, the vaccines are working, um, but The first night I had, or the first night I recovered after the infection, uh, I had a very strange, uneasy kind of experience. It began sometime in the evening, and it was just a very weird sort of pulling and this sort of heaviness in my body, in my chest, my gut, and I knew that wasn't typical, wasn't normal. Um, I tried my best not to panic, uh, but it is difficult not to panic when you experience something distressing that you are unaware of, that you've never experienced before. And I went to the hospital the next morning, and they told me it was acute gastritis, not to worry about anything. My ECG was normal. I had two ECGs that morning, one later in the afternoon, and then at about 5 p.m. that day, a fourth ECG, and they were all normal, so there was no dysfunction there. Um, so yeah, that was kind of interesting. The first sort of electrophysiological marker. There was nothing to be detected, and so in all fairness, the doctor said, "Well, the markers are clear. It's nothing to be bothered by. You can just go home. Here are some medications." I think they prescribed a heavy dose of um, a weird paracetamol that I hadn't heard about before, combination, and a steroid that did help. I didn't understand why it helped, but that seemed to be something that worked. And so that was December. And in Jan, I had another COVID infection, this one at the dental office. I knew it was COVID because I had my dental sitting, and the next day the doctor called up and he said, "Well, we're just closing down the clinic for a few days, 14 days, and we'll see you after that. It's not COVID, don't worry about it. We're not too worried about it ourselves." But that was, I think, in retrospect, perhaps a virus that is able to withstand the cleaning that goes on in a dental office, um, is very interesting. Kind of survived that. Why would it not survive a human body, right? Whose defenses are already weakened. This was very interesting. And so I fell sick again shortly after that. I had a fever, and the pain just kept getting worse. Um, the end of Jan, I had another fever, and so that was about the third fever that I had in a very short span of time. And we tested, and we tested positive for it, and so that was the only time that I have documented RT-PCR, which shows, yeah, this is what you have. And I think that's something important, right? The RT-PCR was a sort of fundamental thing that everyone needed to kind of get at least the COVID diagnosis. And towards the end of Jan 2022, uh, the government shut down systems again for 2 weeks as the numbers kind of increased very rapidly. And so yeah, that was kind of something. But again, no alarm, no dysfunction. My body just kept getting worse. The pain kept increasing instead of getting better. And all that the doctors offered was, well, paracetamol, vitamin C, maybe you need to up your vitamin D, and just rest. This is mostly in your head, don't worry about it. You're feeling very anxious about the situation, and kind of try not to worry about it. And you know I understand that. So that was Jan 2022, and a few months passed by, a month passed by, and the pain didn't get better. And then a colleague of mine suggested, why not, you know, go to another cardiologist and just see what's happening. So by that time, between December and Jan, I had seen, in an emergency setting, I had seen one general physician, one emergency doctor, one cardiologist. In my hometown, I saw another cardiologist, I saw another infectious diseases specialist, um, I saw a pulmonologist, and I saw another uh, GP, right? And they all said the same thing. Well, this is in your head. Don't worry about it. You're just anxious. Uh, the general physician, very interestingly, um, so he asked me about my background, and I explained to him. He said, "No." I said, "No. I'm a psychologist. I'm a neuropsychologist. This is what I'm studying for, and this is what I'm, getting into." And he said, "Well, as a psychologist, I guess you should know what you're displaying are very clear symptoms of neurotic tendencies." And as true, well, I do suppose neuroticism is a trait that I might score high on, um, but but being neurotic, perhaps not. Um, and so I found that very interesting, because he immediately jumped into psychic mechanisms of body dysfunction, and I thought that was kind of interesting for a doctor to sort of just think about. So he suggested, well, you're just extremely neurotic, and don't worry about it. This is just anxiety, and don't worry about things, and things will be okay. Whatever. This sort of dismissal of my symptoms as being a mental health concern, and more on that in a little bit, right? Yeah. So in any case, I came back to the city. I went and met a cardiologist, and she just said, "Well, why have you not? Why has nobody done an ultrasound?" So we did an ultrasound. We found pericarditis, quite an inflamed, large pericardial effusion, and she said, "Well, this is the cause for the pain, and it would have just taken 5 minutes for someone to figure that out. They just needed to do uh, cardiac MRI, cardiac ultrasound." But by that time, um, yeah, anyway, whatever. So then those symptoms continued, and I had a large dose of steroids at that time. Uh, Steroid dose lasted for about 6 months, 6 or 7 months, and that was quite difficult. Um, yeah. Um, After the steroids, I started developing joint pain and rashes, and sort of this weird visual snow, and I found it difficult to focus on objects. Like, I couldn't see properly, and so when I went back, um, I checked in with some other doctors, and one doctor suggested, "Fine, you know what? All of this is there. Why don't you go see a rheumatologist?" So I went to the rheumatologist. I did my ANA test. My ANA test came back positive for Sjogren's, so I had SSA antibodies, and he also suggested at that time that I was probably experiencing seronegative rheumatoid arthritis. So now we're up to three things. We have pericarditis, we have rheumatoid arthritis seronegative, and Sjogren's. And then from there were other systems that were dysfunctioning at that time. My teeth, I had, they just kept breaking. This whole section of my upper jaw, um, the teeth just kept disintegrating one after the other, and that was kind of strange. Um, it was just They just started crumbling. Um, that was yeah. So that was another thing that happened, and so in 2023, I was hospitalized again, and so again they suggested some sort of rheumatic flare, and I learned about what these flares are and how to manage them, and I think that became very interesting. Difficult, but interesting, because then I started slowly understanding the multi-systemic dysfunctions. Um, yeah, so it's been 4 years now, almost, living with long COVID, and there's so many other things, perhaps, symptom-wise. Uh, there's constant headaches. There's this sort of just saccadic movements in the eye. It's kind of difficult to focus sometimes on objects. Vertigo. I was diagnosed with vestibular vertigo, and that's what also led them to a partial diagnosis of dysautonomia. Um, yeah, so it takes a lot from your system and doesn't really give you much in return. I think perhaps the most interesting or the most um, difficult thing to manage is just the symptom unpredictability. Um, every day seems new, every day seems different, and you just never know sort of what's going to go wrong on a particular day. And I think that sort of leads me into the next part, which is just the process of coping with one's changing identity. Um, Realizing that your body, the way in which you respond to the world has to become different. There's no choice. There's I often got asked, why do you want to be this way? Why are you choosing to be this way? Why can't you just feel better? Why can't you just stop thinking about your symptoms? And I often say in my head and sometimes out loud, why would I voluntarily choose this? This is not, it's not nice. Um, Before falling ill, um, I used to cycle a lot, um, run a lot, and this is just completely dysfunctional, right? So that may be just part one of what I'd like to address.